Well, it's a pleasure to see you again, Dr. Califf. Thank you so much. You've been very generous with my viewers and listeners last year. We did one podcast on drug shortages and one on the accelerated approval. And I know you're in the process of leaving the FDA with the change of administration. So hopefully you'll get some time to rest and relax. But welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So I really wanted to chat a bit about innovation and technology with a more specific about artificial intelligence and whether you're seeing any role for bringing any type of innovation or technology, including AI, but not limited to AI, into a heavily regulated processes, because a lot of the things with the FDA are pretty regulated and processes and um, so how do you think about that? How when you try to think of innovation and tech, bring that to a heavily regulated environment as the leader, what are your thought process? What is your thought process?
Sure. I have a long-standing set of views on this because my work with algorithms and computers started in the 1970s. That was quite a while ago. And it's an amazing time for me because there were things that we could see in the late 70s, early 80s when computing, a computer took up an entire room and you would run your code and go to the local pub and have a beer and come back a couple hours later, it will have run. Um, but we could see the potential. And now that potential is coming to reality. So it's very exciting. There have been many steps along the way. And so if we look at where we are now with generative AI on the cusp, just beginning to roll out, it is really important to think about what the regulatory strategy should be. And I'm fortunate that preceding me at FDA was a Center for Digital Health at CDRH, where I think a lot of the principles were laid down before it was even really thought about as AI. I had some interesting experiences in discussing that in my tenure in 2016, 2017 at FDA. Then I went to work at Alphabet for 5 years, where, as I like to say, I got to hang out with three Nobel laureates who just got the Nobel Prizes, but I actually didn't hang out with them personally, but was in the environment that was created where you could really see where this is all headed. And now here we are. But I think there's some really important elements of this that, in many ways, I think come from misperceptions about the FDA itself. Um, I think a lot of what people think about when they think about FDA is medical products, drugs, devices, biologics, dominantly drugs and biologics, where because of some tragedies that occurred with thalidomide and then with devices with the Dalkon Shield, Congress passed laws that said before you can put this stuff on the market, you have to produce evidence that the benefits outweigh the risks using adequate and well-controlled trials in the view of experts in the field. And so this led to the whole pre-market clinical trials system that's now in place. Key Farber Harris was 1964, so that was a while ago. And that's a very rigorous system for what gets on the market. Everything else the FDA regulates is pretty much in the post-market space, and I think devices fall somewhere in between. The very high-risk devices are treated more like drugs, but there are thousands of devices like bed rails and hospital gowns and all kinds of things that are officially devices where you don't need a clinical trial. But everything else is pretty much regulated with the behavior of the industry is the number one issue. So if you look at farms, for example, in the food system, there are 10 rules called food safety from the Food Safety Modernization Act that happened right before my 2015, 2016 entry into FDA. And everyone expects that farms, distribution, supply chain entities, stores, and restaurants are going to abide by those rules. You only get inspected by the FDA every 3 or every 5 years unless something is found that's wrong. So it's a very important part of good corporate behavior according to the rules that are established and the standards for the field. Um, then if you look at, even if you look at drugs and biologics, that pre-market clinical trial system, I'm still shocked when I hear so many people think the FDA actually does the clinical trials. Well, we don't. The trials are done by the industry and they're expected to play by the rules. And one of the great things about the US FDA is that they have to submit their raw data to us. So you do get an independent analysis in that case. But basically, the companies do the trials, not the FDA, and they collect the data and they have to have the evidence. And then post-market, it's sort of like farming. We expect manufacturers to do a good job. Good manufacturing practices are well known. There's a lot of effort. There's a phrase, educate before you regulate, is a key part of it. And we use inspections and analysis of data to really check on the system more than to primarily run the system. We don't have an inspector in every manufacturing facility every day.
Right,
So now let's move to AI.
right.
So it's kind of interesting that people would even think that the FDA would have an inspector looking at every AI algorithm pre-market. What we really need is a first-rate system that operates by a set of principles. And I'd go even further with regard to AI because and here I know I'm talking a lot here, so if you want to interrupt me, feel free.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I like how you split pre-market and post-market. My simple brain thinks in an abstract way, so I like dividing things into steps, right? I mean, there's like, when it comes to trials and drugs with their devices, you've got pre-market, post-market, and then you have the food industry. So when you have AI, these algorithms and these large language models and this tech, as a regulatory agency, are you applying this in the way you review the data, in the way you mandate, for example, how companies can leverage AI in the way they conduct studies? Like, where do you fit in bringing AI in your processes?
Well, so first of all, I think of this in terms of categories of processes. There's, the biggest single area is software as a medical device, which includes decision support for clinical care and other purposes, and then software built into traditional devices. And that's regulated by the Center for Devices. This is what they do. AI algorithms are classified as a device as long as they're applied to diagnosing or treating a disease. But then you also have the use of AI in the development of products like devices and drugs and biologics. Particularly for drugs and biologics, you have the Center for Drugs, the Center for Biologics. There, what happens with AI is mostly industry's business. Um, let's say you're looking at protein folding to help identify targets or biological effects of something that you're working on. That's not really an FDA issue. The FDA issue really comes into play when you've got a molecule, whether it be a biologic or a drug, and there you have to prove that the benefits outweigh the risks in adequate and well-controlled clinical trials. So what you do before that is your business. Now, it's important that the reviewers at CDR, at CBER and CDER know a lot about AI since they spend a lot of time, and this is a key element of FDA that I think is vastly underplayed. They spend a lot of time with companies as they develop products to help them do it well, and also to identify early when something is going to fail.
But let's say you have a company that is really submitting all of the data to you, right, to review. So you got this like thousands of records maybe or whatever it is. Could AI be an element of literally analyzing all of this data and the output would be, okay, this is good, this is bad, allowing like because maybe it's better than human. I don't know, maybe.
Well, I was going to get to that. But the way you described it, let's think about it. The company does, well, almost all the applications we get now have AI at some point in developing the product, whether it's helping to design the clinical trials or looking at the way the biology works. And so the reviewers need to understand that. But then you brought up this big area of how is AI used inside the FDA?
Right.
And we're doing a lot of work on that right now. In fact, before I leave, we're going to have a final report, which is really more of a vision than it is specific report because it's going to take money to do this well. But let's just take the area of fraud. Um, Analyzing the data to find out patterns of fraudulent data, AI is going to be vastly superior to the human eye at that. And a large part of my career was large clinical trials where statistical process control was the most common way you found people who were faking it, not by inspectors going on site. You look at the data, it looks too good or it looks too bad, and it looks different than the other data at different sites. You know something's wrong. Well, AI is going to be really good at that. But there's also just the day-to-day work that reviewers have to do. There's a mountain of paperwork and squaring away new documents and old documents, and the use of RAGs, as they're called, collections of documents that are already curated to enable getting through them quickly is going to be really, really important. And then another area that we're beginning to work on now, and we have a manuscript coming out about this. People think about the FDA inspectorate as human beings going to a site and inspecting, and that is an absolutely critical part. There's nothing like the human vision and sense of what's going on. But there is a ton of really important information out there on the internet. I learned a lot about this at Alphabet or Google, what could be scraped off of publicly available information. And we wouldn't use that for specific regulatory decisions, but for example, developing a risk profile about a company or a product. There's a lot of information out there that we're not taking advantage of now because we haven't had the tools to do it. And AI should enable us to do that. All right, so those are the categories. Then let's come back to what I think the biggest, hottest area is going to be, which is decision support. And there, when you categorize it, there's a part of it which right now is not regulated by FDA, and that's decision support for administrative functions. But when decision support now bridges over into advice about clinical care, then it's in an area where FDA regulates, but it's so vast that up to now there's been a large element of what's called enforcement discretion, that is, we're not doing hands-on regulation. The place where we are doing hands-on regulation is if you put an AI algorithm into a high-risk traditional device. Think about cardiac defibrillators as a good
Mhm.
example. You would hope that before someone put in an algorithm to decide whether your defibrillator was going to charge up, that it was tested and evaluated. And so we have the spectrum of decision support, and that we know this is going to be a huge area. We all use it every day if we drive a car. Even if we don't drive a car, our bus drivers and
Mhm.
Uber and Lyft drivers are using AI to figure out where to go. And it's for sure that people will be navigating the health system on both the clinician and the patient side um, using AI. And so when you look at the vastness of this, it looks to me more like the agriculture situation than it does like very discrete individual high-risk devices like defibrillators, because it's going to be woven into our everyday life. And in addition to that, and this is where the prescience of the FDA folks ahead of me were, what they wrote about in the early guidances on just statistical algorithms as part of device regulation was to say the pre-market phase is really important. You need to get that right. But the post-market phase is actually much more important because it's one thing to develop an algorithm in a control situation. It's a whole different thing to know how that algorithm is going to work when it's applied to a specific real world population.
Yeah.
And this is even more obvious, particularly with generative AI, because the whole thing changes depending on the inputs and the outputs that affect behavior are then fed back into the inputs. And so there's a concept that I love called recurrent local validation, which I'm 100% sure is where we're going to ultimately end up. And that is, you're going to need to validate your AI algorithm in the real world essentially continuously or as close to continuously as you can get because AI algorithms will drift either in a positive direction or a negative direction. You don't know which it's doing unless you're
Sure.
continuing to evaluate it. So that gets us back to farming because the company that generates the algorithm can't do that validation. It's going to have to be done in every hospital and health system.
Right.
It's going to have to be built into the system.
You mentioned earlier that there's this within the FDA, there's the Center of Digital Health.
Yeah.
That's AI fits under that center.
Yeah. And you have to pardon me. I'm in the middle of a bunch of things, so it's hard. I'm blanking on all the right names. But yeah, there's a big center that deals with AI. There's now an advisory committee on AI also that had its first meeting. That was a 2-day meeting just last
Yeah.
month. People should look at that if they're really interested in where the field is going.
Yeah, and I want to review that. I get my question is just much larger in this. Like, what's the mission of that committee or that office? Like the goal is to what? Is it to bring tech? I don't want to put words in your mouth, to bring tech to the regulatory process, to make sure like fraud, you mentioned fraud. Is there a particular set of goals that the office is trying to accomplish?
You could go to their website and see a whole list of goals, but what I would say is at a very proximal level, of course, FDA by law must regulate devices, and to the extent that AI algorithms are labeled as software as a medical device, they have an obligation to lead the regulation of those devices. The center is within CDRH, within the devices center at FDA. But if you look at their strategy, as I say, it's not just hands-on regulation with a rigid set of rules. In fact, it's the opposite. They're spending a lot of time interacting with the community, health systems, companies that devise software, the mad professor inventor. There are plenty of those out there in this field, and patient groups and patient population. So they're busy trying to help build an ecosystem now that will be, like the food system, a networked um, regulatory system that operates through a set of principles and rules that can then be tested. Then the FDA looks over that and inspects and audits at some frequency. That's the general scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading, as part of my research, I was reading a paper that was looking at how AI can help interpreting chest x-rays because they're the most common imaging study ordered by physicians. And apparently, I didn't know that before I read the paper, there's 30% error in interpreting chest x-rays. I found that to be astonishingly very high. But what this was trying to do is bring a software device into helping radiologists and not radiologists interpret the chest x-ray, and it improved the accuracy significantly. But they specifically commented it was a device that was approved by the FDA. So to your point, that some of these have to go through FDA processes, but not every software goes through the FDA, correct? Like not every software device or company or AI must go through the AI, the regulatory.
Yeah, as I said, if it's for administrative purposes, definitely not. The law specifies that. If it's decision support, this is where there's enforcement discretion. There are guidances on this about when you should and when you shouldn't. My perception is that not everyone's playing by the rules right now in this rapidly changing area. It will come into focus and we'll figure it out. For example, there's a really nice paper in JAMA recently that said a good health system should have a registry of its AIs. Um, it should know what AI is being used and it should monitor its own AI because who knows what whether it's helping or hurting the patients that you're trying to treat. And I'll just comment on the thing about diagnostic accuracy and errors. I mean, that's a complicated area, right? Because what you call an error might be something very trivial or it might be something very important. And I would say almost everything I've seen so far, and I've been doing this kind of research for over 30 years. I started with things like coronary angiography, where you had similar, you know, error rates. And in some cases, it might be just the lesion was in a different branch of the coronary arteries. In others, you might see someone really missed like a
Mhm.
left main lesion, which would be, you know, a critical error. But almost always the algorithm plus a clinician is better than either alone.
Yeah.
Almost always.
So what if I wear my patient hat, and I think that we can agree all of us are patients at some level, where I want the AI to fit in from the regulatory process is to speed the approval of drugs that we want to get faster to people. Like if you ask me, right, all of us, if I bring technology and I'm able to bring the drug to market instead of like 3 years, 2 years, and the drug is effective, then that year hopefully is going to help a lot of patients. That's where I want. This is a personal opinion. That's where I would like to see AI being applied to speed some of these processes because I feel we do a lot of things that are redundant and so on. Am I off target or is my request
Well,
reasonable?
I have to know we're about to run out of time here because I have another
Yeah,
obligation.
yeah.
Let me unload my thoughts on this. It's an important question. And I couldn't be closer to it right now. My little brother just died of pancreatic cancer, and I have very much on my mind the idea that there will be a treatment that's more effective for pancreatic cancer in the near future. And so I'm very driven and sympathetic to your appeal for faster. But I would also say you have to keep in mind that 90% of drugs that get into phase one don't make it to market because the risks outweigh the benefits. And so you don't want to be speeding along treatments that are ineffective or cause harm just because you're going so fast. So you got to balance these areas of speed and accuracy in the evaluation. And then finally, I would say the place where I have to say I think you are off target because I don't think people talk enough about this. And I'm going to have to close with this thought. So we'll see what you think about it. I think the biggest area where AI is needed is not fancy new drugs and devices. I think it's routine primary medical care, helping people get through the day in an effective way, the same way we can navigate roads so much better now because we have um, driving elements. So we have a big project at FDA called Home as a Healthcare Hub. And I really think if the ingenuity of um, AI and computation was put into controlling hypertension and smoking cessation, how much cancer would go away if we didn't have 30 million people using combustible tobacco? And even for cancer patients, when now that I've been through the family experience, just trying to find a clinic to go to and which protocols are available and how to get access to them, it's a nightmare. So I think we have an ongoing nightmare in the American healthcare system. I don't know what you think. People like you and me tend to do pretty well. My brother did pretty well. He had, really high level people helping him out. But most people can't even get a primary care appointment right now.
Sure. Yeah.
So why don't we put all that fancy knowledge and technology to work to make it so you can navigate your basic healthcare needs just like we do driving a car? That to me, and the FDA wants to help that. We're trying to, just think about it right now. We have an app for everything in health, right? But none of them are connected to each other. What human being can, have 15 different apps going at the same time trying to figure out what to do with it? We need to organize and simplify and help people navigate the system.
We have to be pragmatic, and that's a perfect way to end this podcast. I know you're extremely busy, especially this time of the year, as there are changes happening, and I appreciate you giving us time. It's a lot of thoughts to go through, and wish you all the luck as you finish your tenure at the FDA.
Thanks so much, and good luck with your ongoing project on AI. Take care.